Florida currently experiencing a renaissance in its football program over the last week. The Gators upset Ole Miss, and now the attention has turned to the future and what the Gators can actually accomplish instead of just a few short weeks ago when we were potentially looking at a new coach. Tonight on the In All Kinds of Weather forecast, we have our founder, Neil Schulman, recapping his thoughts on the Ole Miss game, Billy's thoughts on Billy Napier and how they've changed, and of course, FSU preview from him. But before we get into all of that, want to make sure that if you're not already, hit that subscribe button down below. Leave a like if you are fired up as we are of the Gators' progress and renaissance currently happening in our program. And leave a comment of how your opinion over the season has changed on Billy Napier. We want to hear your thoughts. And of course, the All Kinds of Weather forecast is proudly sponsored by 401k Generation, the wealth management company that helps you invest today for your future tomorrow. Their team of advisors is committed to providing guidance and education for your 401k plan and its participants. And they also offer a range of enrollment solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your company's 401k plan. Whether it's saving for your child's college, investment advice, or even your retirement, 401k Generation's team of advisors makes getting to know you their top priority. Their advisors will tailor a path to assist you in navigating life's financial milestones and reaching your financial goals. 401k Generation, building stronger futures one generation at a time. For more information, contact them at 866-998-5879 or visit their website at 401kgeneration.com. And of course, we want to shout out the official apparel partner of the In All Kinds of Weather forecast, Heads and Tails, located here in Tampa, Florida. Make sure to take advantage of that code that we have, IAKOW30, for 30% off in store or online at theheadsandtails.com. As you can see, I'm sporting the reversible swamp hat, which you can get in store or online. And now that we are in Thanksgiving and the holiday season, you can gift your family some of these great, amazing gifts in their store. Make sure to go check them out, of course, at theheadsandtails.com or in store using the code IAKOW30 for 30% off. All right, Neil, we've got some celebration. I think it's kind of nice coming on here. The last couple of shows have been a little bit more jubilant. There's a renaissance, as I think we've labeled it now, as you labeled it on the In All Kinds of Weather website in your recent article. You wrote a piece recapping the wild win. And obviously, it seems like your stance has changed on Napier's a bit. I think the majority of the fan base's stance has changed on Napier a bit. We'll get into that in a minute. But first, what stood out to you in the Gators' victory over Ole Miss?
So here's the main takeaway, and it's going to come with a caveat and a big distinction. Florida is still not a very good football team, but they're playing like one. And essentially, what I mean by that is they still make a lot of mistakes, a lot of self-inflicted wounds here and there. Chamari DK, for example, deflecting the ball for an interception. Bryce Thornton getting beat for a touchdown. Billy Napier, again, not seemingly able to figure out who he is in terms of, am I scared money don't make money Billy, or am I ultra conservative, calm, cool, collected Billy? Again, at the end of the first half. And on the last drive of the game, in between the two Thornton picks, there's no interest in getting the first down, which would end the game, removing all the upside of the reward side of the risk reward matrix. Not that you want to go four verts there, but maybe a little RPO, a little bootleg with a design safety valve. It's a high percentage completion throw, something like that. That's all frustrating. But here's the difference now. Florida overcame all of that and they won the football game. And what have I been saying, Chris, on this show for years about good teams and bad teams? What separates them?
I honestly don't remember.
Good teams find ways to
Win
win games.
games. That's right.
Bad teams find ways to lose games. Well, Florida had 2 weeks in a row now, found ways to win. I used that line pretty consistently throughout the past few years when the Gators were losing. And people would go, yeah, well, if that one thing goes differently, we win. And I'd go, I don't care because we lost the game. Look at the record, yada, yada. That's just who he is. Well, I hate where public discourse has gone these days. I really despise people who move the goalposts. So, you know what? Fair is fair. And I've got to apply the same principles no matter which way they work out. And Florida has now found a way to beat two top 25 teams in a row, which is something they hadn't done since the Natty year of 2008. So, again, if you watch the game tape, you'll see more missed tackles, fewer of them than in September, but still, you'll see some bad route combos. You'll see missed assignments. But you know what? The Gators won the game. 5 things stuck out. I'll run through them as quick as I can. Number one, Bryce Thornton, SEC Defensive Player of the Week. We've got some recruiting to talk about as well coming up later. A lot of people grumbling about how we just flipped some 3 stars we're never going to play. Bryce Thornton was a 3 star. And it wasn't even the 2 picks. It was, because those are easy pop flies that anyone who ever played outfield in Little League would have caught. He was everywhere on that field all day long. 14 tackles, 5 of them solo. The amount of ground he had to cover on some of those, 14 tackles. A couple of them were him just luring guys out of bounds, but still, if you ever played football, you feel those bruises when you hit the ground wrong or the guy's kneecap bangs in your jaw. It's not always fun. And 14 times Bryce Thornton brought ball carriers to the ground. And of course, redemption, getting beat on the touchdown. Thornton gets not 1 but 2 picks to end the game. Number 2, defensive line. Again, for the second straight week, kind of feast or famine. There were a lot of plays where the defensive line just didn't apply any pressure, but when they did, they got home and they sacked Jackson Dart 4 times on the day. Also, a pair of 4th-and-1 stops inside the Florida 15-yard line. I I mean, for all that I like to say positively about Lane Kiffin, I don't know why he insisted on running the same play with defensive tackle JJ Pegues over and over again. Miles Graham, a freshman, in on both of them. On the second one, Cam Jackson comes up, just swallows him up, and throws him to the ground. Now, Pegues is a big boy. He's a defensive tackle himself. Pure strength and weight room gains on display right there for Cam Jackson. Number 3, happy senior day, Montrell Johnson. He's dealt with some injuries, dealt with Jaden Ball and Jacoby Jackson being good and deserving carries, which siphoned some of his away. But Montrell's given a lot to this program after coming here with Billy. He deserved that nice send off, and he got it by scoring the team's last touchdown of the year in the Swamp on a Wildcat. I've been very critical of Billy's play call throughout the year. I thought this was an objectively good design, not just because it worked, but because Montreal just gotten the ball 2 times in a row on handoffs and had gotten positive yards on them. So you got the hot hand, do it again. But let's add a little wrinkle to it, just a little something different so that Ole Miss can't just start sniffing it out and teeing off on it. Let's take the handoff part out of the equation. Just give him the football directly out of the Wildcat, tell him make one read, one cut, and go. And the offensive line did its job for him as well. Number 4, speaking of the offensive line, what a turnaround. What a turnaround from the Miami game and even the Texas game to now. I still don't know that it's worth having 2 offensive line coaches, but that was a really impressive showing. Ole Miss has a monster defensive line. Walter Nolan is a finalist for the Outland Trophy. And former Gator Princely Umanmielen, who apparently wanted blood in this game and made it personal for himself, nothing. He was a complete non-factor during the game and had a little crash out after it, running up the ramp to try to fight some people, which, first of all, I don't really love the idea of yelling at opposing players unless they do something like Cash Daniel to Kyle Trask. But for Princely to go and do that, yeah, all right, kind of shows immaturity. Sure, that's what everyone's talking about. It also shows me, okay, here's a guy in Princely who's very talented. Clearly, the raw talent's not the issue. But he's got a habit of taking plays off and being lazy, like we saw him do as a Gator. He wanted this one. This was the game. This was his Super Bowl. Not the Egg Bowl like most of his teammates, not LSU or Georgia big name opponents. This was the game he worked for all year long, and he was a complete no-show. Florida's offensive line bottled him up and did not let him do anything. And it's not like Walter Nolan made a huge impact either. I mean, he made a few plays, 3 TFLs, but didn't completely wreck the game plan for Florida either. And that's because the offensive line did its job. Austin Barber, Damian George, Jake Slaughter, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, all did their jobs very, very well on this day. And the best play to me was the blocks they set up for Jaden Ball on the screen. Great job paving the way for Johnson on the TD run too. Yeah, amazing improvement there. And the last one is the low-hanging fruit, DJ Lagway, continuing to be spectacular, avoiding a sack, getting off a first down throw on not 1, not 2, but 3 separate occasions. Beautiful corner route to Badger. Stats weren't all that impressive, but again, you watch that tape and you see a guy continuing to make special things happen and giving Florida a chance to win. Now, the more I watch him play like that, the more frustrated I go. More frustrated I get and go, why was he not playing from the start against Miami? But okay, if Napier learns from this, water under the bridge, lesson learned. Napier messed up, but he's better because of it. So let's see how that goes going forward, and if Napier plays favoritism at the QB position again. But yeah, I mean, I just crammed like 3 hours of thinking about this game on the drive home from Florida up to Charleston. But what a win, Chris. What a win.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. And it was an impressive win. And, I think that what's really cool about what's happened in the last couple of weeks is nobody expected this, right? Nobody expected Billy Napier to have this resurgence like we've seen before. And obviously, we're thrilled to have it. You and I had said that we believed he should be fired during the season multiple times. And I think we had some pretty good reasons and facts behind that. But certainly, in light of recent events, this has changed. It has completely changed now, in that Florida is going in a different direction. They're keeping Billy Napier and they seemingly are playing better. So, obviously, in your article, you could see that you've kind of obviously changed your opinion on Billy Napier somewhat. What are your thoughts now as we conclude this season? We go into an offseason where there will be a lot of hype with DJ Lagway as our quarterback, the recruiting obviously taking up. We'll touch on that in a moment. And the sky maybe is the limit now for what we can accomplish in this regime.
So here's the take on Napier for me. First, you got to beat FSU. I'm not even entertaining the idea of me eating crow yet because that game hasn't happened and I don't have that data. The data I do have is of Florida winning a big game or even a pair of big games to build some momentum and then turning right back around the next week and losing to a terrible team like Utah in his first ever game, being on top of the world and then losing to Kentucky. And honestly, what's probably even the worst result than that is needing South Florida to mess up a routine field goal hold on the final play to survive that game. South Florida, by the way, finished that year 1-11, or beating A&M in South Carolina handily and then turning around and losing to Vandy. Not 24 Vandy, mind you, but 22 Vandy. Or last year again, Tennessee. How do we follow that up? We know what happens. So let's pump the brakes on that. Let's now take the big wins we've just gotten and follow that up with the win over the team we're supposed to beat. So because we haven't done that yet, I'm not assuming anything against FSU, but the Noles are pitiful. So I think Florida does have a very good chance to win that game. Assuming they do, I will then give the people what they want. I will eat the crow after that game is over. What I will say is if Florida does beat FSU, they finish 7-5. In our preseason preview show, I said the bare minimum that I need to see to believe in Napier for a fourth season is 7-5. And if Florida does avoid the stumble in Tallahassee, well, now we have a sea change. And honestly, I don't want to see Florida just glide to an ugly 20-17 type of win. The Gators need to pound the Seminoles in this game, demolish them, smite them. This is a team that just lost 35-11 to North Carolina. How did North Carolina do this year? They fired
They
their head
just,
coach.
as I said, they just fired Mac Brown.
Yeah. So, not a good North Carolina team. Smacked FSU 35-11 in Tallahassee. This game spread is bouncing around in the mid teens right now. I think I saw 15 and a half. Chris, do you have an updated spread on?
Yeah, it's anywhere between 14 and a half and 15 and a half. It honestly depends on the book that you're looking
Okay.
at.
So the books say Florida's going to win by 2, 3 scores. That's what I need. I need to see a 3-score win. Again, if a bad UNC team can do it, Florida can do it. If Florida just goes and plays their B game, they'll do it. So if Florida gets a convincing win over FSU, let's say by 17 points or more, let's say they cover the spread and they make it just an even, clean 3-possession final score. I will officially be of the mindset of, okay, I genuinely believe that Billy Napier has earned another year, not being given, earned another year. And there are still a lot of questions. I still think he's got to give up the play calling duties. I still think he's got to pass off some of those many hats he wears. He's got to go to clock management school. I mean, even against Ole Miss, it was bad. And the defense, statistically speaking, I know they come up clutch now, but statistically speaking, it's a bad defense for the third year in a row under Billy Napier. But here's the distinction. Again, like I said, we knew Napier was coming back because our Sith Lord of an AD told us he was. After the Texas game, he has a 4-5 record. The reality was that Napier was given another year. He was gifted to it. Napier will now have proven that he has earned it, that he deserves it. So that I think is where the conversation needs to go. It cannot go directly from fire him, he sucks, he's awful, to he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. No, it's not a binary thing. It's a scale. And even more honestly, it's a color wheel. There's so many nuances and variables that have to be taken into account here. I didn't lose my faith in Napier in one night. I didn't want to ever, I never wanted to fire him because of one game. It was because of a collection of things, of which the final straw that broke the camel's back pushed me over the edge to call for it. But it was not just because of that one game against Tennessee or that one game against Miami or A&M or Arkansas, etc., in a vacuum. So let's remember that. We don't just go from fire the coach to he's amazing or even just completely neutral in the snap of a finger. It has to be a wave of things that all happen pushing him in one direction, either good or bad. If we want to fire him, it has to be because of a wave of terrible things happen all at once. And if we want to change our minds about him in the other sense for a positive way, it has to be a wave of good things happening. And Chris, I think right now it's a small sample size. It's 2 wins, and it's only a handful of recruits, not a whole class, but we're starting to see it sort of turn that way.
Yeah, it exactly. That's well said because right now, if you go to win against FSU, if you finish with a near top 10 recruiting class, heck, maybe even a top 10 recruiting class if things fall our way, you win the bowl game. You go into the season 8-5, lots of momentum, probably honestly ranked. Florida got some ranked votes this past weekend to be in the top 25. I think if they throttle FSU like we're saying they're going to, I do believe they'll actually be a ranked team in one of the last polls of the season, especially if they win their bowl game when the AP drops their last one in January. But nonetheless, it's going to take finishing the year like that this strongly, and then rolling into next year beating teams like Miami, winning against the USFs of the world, and then starting to beat then the teams like Tennessee and potentially Georgia, who you didn't actually have never beaten, or you didn't beat, you have never beaten Georgia, you've only beaten Tennessee once, beating their rivals consistently. Those are the next steps then where you can really say, yes, all this was warranted. We have turned the page. We were wrong to want Billy Napier fired, and we were right to end up keeping him.
And I was gonna say, there's still a lot of work he's got to do for that to happen. I'm not strictly talking past tense here, or even hypothetical tense. Like there has to be, or there have to be, or there should be XYZ that happens for us to turn our opinions of him. Napier's got to go and do those things. He's
Yep.
got to make these moves in the offseason. For all we know, I mean, I'm never going to know because I can ask players and they're going to sing the praises of both guys. For all we know, Craig Fitzgerald, who was our strength and conditioning coach for what, 5 weeks, did a phenomenal job. And Miles, who replaced him, did nothing. But because of the gains they made under Craig Fitzgerald, they're now finishing games in the fourth quarter late in the season. I don't know because the players aren't going to be that brutally honest to throw one under the bus if that was the case. Napier is the only one, and I guess the people who he hires, they're the only ones who truly know if they're making the right moves or not. They have to be honest with themselves and say, look, we survived. All right. We were hanging over a cliff after that Texas A&M game, but we survived it. How do we not ever be in that position again? What do we do that provides a process that will then yield the results that no rational Gator fan can possibly be unhappy with? Results, by the way, like Dan Mullen had. It's going to look very, very different. It's a different style of offense, first of all. Napier is a very different type of human being. His temperament's different, right? But the 9-3, 10-2, and then if you translate the COVID year to the schedule we were supposed to have, like get rid of A&M and Arkansas and replace them with the what was it, Eastern Washington and South Alabama, then Florida's 10-2 again that year. Even if you include the LSU loss, which doesn't happen that way because it's not the chain of events happens differently. But those results are fine because that's going to put Florida in the CFP every single year as long as the losses aren't embarrassing and we don't lose our quarterback like FSU did last year. Sorry, I know that's still a sore spot for you guys. But the point is, if there's a process in place that can churn out 9-3, 10-2 consistently, Florida fans are going to be very, very happy with Billy Napier for a long, long time because that was why when the time came to fire Mullen, I wanted Napier because I thought he could be a long-term solution for the same reason that everyone who's been criticizing me about calling for his head has come after me for. Do you want to keep recycling coaches every 3 or 4 years? No. No, I don't. That's why I wanted this guy in the first place because I thought he was the antidote to all of that. And look, there are always going to be that distinct minority of fans who believes in Billy Napier. Some of them for the right reasons. Many, they just thought that he needed more time before the results began to show that the process genuinely was going to take 3 to 4 years. I don't agree with that. I don't think it should take that long. But if you were of that mindset, okay, fair enough. And then you have the halfwits who eat paint chips and glue and go, he's the coach. If you don't support him, you're a bad fan, and all that good stuff. The point is, if Napier makes the changes he's supposed to make, there's going to be no disagreement. There's going to be no animosity between bastions of Gator fans. And there's just going to be the Gator football experience that we all started rooting for the Gators to see. That's winning on the field, that's looking good, that's feeling good about our future. And all of that hinges on this offseason for Billy Napier. So if Napier has an offseason where he makes objectively good moves and he builds on what he has built at the end of this season, both on the recruiting trail and on the field, Napier just might be the guy for years and maybe even decades to come. And if that happens, I will be the loudest to apologize for ever doubting him.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. We'll wait for that moment if the time does come. Before we do talk about that momentum in recruiting, quickly, let's put a bow on Ole Miss. Let's give your grades, and then we'll get over to recruiting.
Yeah, I'll go quick. Offense, B minus. It was a solid showing, only 344 yards, but that was against a pretty good Ole Miss defensive line, and they scored when they had to. So good, but not great. Showing B minus. Defense, B. They gave up a lot of yards, but boy, did they lock down in the red zone. Again, same thing. Yards, not good. 464 yards is a lot, but again, they made the plays they had to make. The 2 fourth down stops of JJ Pegues, Miles Graham with a hell of a game. If he played like this against Miami and Texas A&M the first month of the year, he might be up for SEC Freshman of the Year. Like he's looking that good right now on the Gator defense. And of course, Bryce Thornton was everywhere. Ideally, you'd like to not bend or break. The theory of bend don't break. You give up yards between the 20s, but you lock down and make them kick field goals. Ideally, you just get off the field quicker. But again, they made the plays they had to. B. Special teams, B plus. Jeremy Crawshaw shanked the punt late in the game. That's not good, but that was really the only thing wrong that I can remember. Florida also got a huge special teams play as well from DJ Douglas, recovering a muff punt. Trey Smack hit a 53, 54 yarder. That's clutch. Another nice punt return by Chimere DK, too. Honestly, probably the best special teams game all year, unless I'm just not thinking of one. I mean, I guess against Miami and A&M, they weren't bad, but just everything else was so terrible, no one even cared. But this was the best special teams performance in a win for the Gators all year. Coaching, B. I think we just have to make peace, at least for now, with the fact that Napier is just not that good as a situational game engineer. Like he's just not good at managing the clock at the end of the half or the end of the game. He doesn't know when it's calculated that he should take a somewhat of a risk and maybe throw a safe throw, or maybe order a safe throw to maybe get a first down and cut the head off and end it. But he had these guys ready to play. And that is something that you just can't you can't replicate that. You can't fake that. You can't ask a coach to do it. They either do it or they don't do it. And he has them ready to play every single week now. Texas game notwithstanding, these guys have been ready to play every single week for the last really 8 games. Ever since the A&M game, they've been showing up and balling out. So I'm not going to give Napier a medal of honor for this because the team should not have come out that flat to start with against Miami and A&M, but there's undoubtedly been enormous improvement and he deserves that credit. So B for the coaching, and the fans get an A. Only reason it's not an A plus is because there were some empty seats, but for a noon game, this was a great atmosphere. Fans did a phenomenal job making noise. They forced Jackson Dart to go player to player, relaying the signals on a few occasions. And moreover, they just helped make this atmosphere an atmosphere that recruits want to play in, which the recruits who were at the game took notice of. And I'm sure that's what we will talk about next, as we have now officially put a bow on the Ole Miss game.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, you touched on it. The recruits were there. They witnessed an incredible game. I think that it's pretty obvious we've built some big time momentum on the recruiting trail. We talked about it. I talked about it in the last episode, highlighting the four recent commitments. But you wrote a couple of articles too, and you pointed out that Napier has had problems sustaining momentum in the past. Do you think this rise in momentum is real this time, or do you have concerns that it could just be the next peak in the wave pattern or the circle of life, as I dubbed it in the last show?
It's a good phrase for it. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I don't know. As someone who talks about the Gators all the time, and people always assume I have a big ego, I'm okay with just saying I don't know because I've seen the Gators, like you said.
That's
I've
a
seen
first.
them.
No, just kidding.
Yeah, no, right? No, but seriously, like I've seen the Gators build momentum on the trail and on the field, only to squander it with terrible losses on the field, which then has a trickle down effect on both. I think that it's perfectly fair to be concerned that this is just another mirage. Actually, not even a mirage, just part of his pattern, part of the roller coaster pattern that he just brings. But there's one thing that makes me think this might be different. Think about how those patterns have played out within the course of their respective seasons. Year one, Florida 6-4 on top of the world. Go to Aggie land, stomp A&M in the second half there, blow South Carolina to the moon, and then you lose to Vandy and FSU. Year two, all right, Utah and Kentucky aren't good, but you're 5-2. You're looking pretty good. No, you lose all the rest of your games. Year three, you start badly with terrible performances against Miami and A&M. Then things start to improve, and then you get whacked by Texas. Well, you're right back to where you started. But then you beat two ranked teams in a row in the next 2 weeks. And again, you're going to have to beat FSU for this talking point to come to fruition. But assuming you do, well, maybe Texas was just I don't know, a bad air pocket as you're climbing through those clouds. Maybe that really was just the anomaly for what we can expect on this actual ascent. Because now, for the first time, not only is Florida playing its best ball at the end of the year, but they've slowly but consistently ascended. The trend, the trajectory is pretty constant. Florida has gotten better and better and better with a couple of anomalies like Texas. And then, I mean, they played well against Tennessee too. I can't even say a couple. I'll just say the Texas game was the anomaly. And again, it could be another flash in the pan. We could start out next season with an embarrassing loss to USF, which isn't a joke anymore with Alex Golish, and then get blasted by Miami again. We'll have a very different team, but it could happen. It wouldn't surprise me. But again, the thing that's giving me pause is that we're seeing this new piece of data. We haven't seen a rise like this towards the end of a football season before. This is a first. And like I say all the time, I'm about the data and the results. That's why I kept throwing out Napier's 15-19 record, which is now 17-19, or his 1-10 or 2-10 record against rivals after the LSU game. But this is new. This is data we have not had before, and that goes for recruiting just as it does for on-field results. Like I said about last October, Florida losing 5 straight to end the year. Their recruiting class was in the top 5 and completely imploded as the team on the field did the same. Now we're seeing the recruiting class skyrocket up the rankings in the last mile of the marathon here. Signing day is just a couple weeks away. That's also new. Previously, all the momentum that Napier had ever built on the recruiting trail came in the offseason, the winter, the spring, and the summer, not the fall. Now you see things going in the right direction as they near the finish line. And that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, indeed. I'm hopeful too. This is something a little bit different. We've never beaten two ranked teams in a row in the Napier era, so this is uncharted territory. Certainly, we're gonna eagerly await to see how we obviously do Saturday, and then therefore early signing day in a few weeks. But if these trend lines do continue, Neil, it is very promising for the long-term trajectory of the program. All right, so now it's time to get to our last segment of this show with you. Let's talk about FSU, the old rival, that old school out west. Give us your keys, your percent chance to win, and a score prediction of what you think goes down in Tallahassee this Saturday night.
All right. Well, the first thing, I actually have some intel here that I was never expecting to be able to use, but FSU is atrocious. Like atrocious doesn't even capture the extent of it. My FSU friends and family, including those who actually have plugs with the program, say that this team has quit. And this is my personal intel. Do not use Charleston Southern to justify anything. That team is 1-11 in the FCS. And I live 2 miles from their campus. They're in my chamber of commerce. I've seen more of them than I wanted to this year. I've seen them snap the ball over the holder's head on a field goal. I've seen their punter strike out attempting to punt the ball, like just drop it to punt it and miss. I've seen two receivers try to box each other out on a jump ball. They knock each other down and it's picked off and run back for a touchdown. I've seen the QB literally pitch the ball right to a defensive lineman. I guess he thought in that split second heat of the moment that it was his teammate. It wasn't. He just ran an option and pitched it right to the defensive lineman. Touchdown. It's Keystone Cops meets Three Stooges meets Bad News Bears with maybe a little bit of SpongeBob and Patrick slapstick favor. Florida would beat that Charleston Southern team by 80. Even with Aiden Warner, Florida would beat them by 40. They're that bad. Like I saw FSU was favored by 33 and a half. Immediately said to my FSU people, bet on FSU. I know FSU is terrible. You'll cover that spread. And they did. Closer than I thought because CSU scored with a few seconds to go, but they still covered. So winner, SVP style, bad beats. Why do I tell you this? Well, they played the game. It counts. It goes in the history books. I'm not trying to take the win away from FSU or anything like that. For the sake of judging this FSU team and scouting them, throw that game out the window. Do not even acknowledge that it happened. In the interest of providing a fair assessment of this FSU team from a statistical standpoint, strike that game off the record. Do not use the yardage from that game. Do not use any statistics. They are 1-9 for all intents and purposes. They have still not scored more than 21 points all season. They have not scored more than 16 points on the continent of North America. And all those ugly stats about them that were in effect all season long, again, for the sake of giving you an accurate read of this FSU team, never happened in that one game. So, long story short, Florida should win this game in Tallahassee by 20. They could win it by 40, but again, the data that we go back to says that Napier is going to, again, primarily Tennessee in 23 and Central Florida this year. Team is juiced for a big game. It knows it needs. Florida goes up big, but off the gas. Napier gets ultra conservative, tries to bleed the clock out. Opponent claws into the final margin and makes it look closer than it was. And honestly, that's what I'm looking forward to not happen. That is what I want to see Florida avoid because Florida has the position on position advantage every single place on the field. There is nothing that FSU does that makes me think that they have any advantage over Florida. The Gators should own the trenches. FSU actually did have a decent defensive line to start the year, but I think Damian Martinez in Miami broke it because then O'Marion Hampton and UNC ran for 5 billion yards on them, and it's just gotten worse as the year went along. FSU's offensive line is horrendous. I'd be very surprised if Florida's front with guys like Cam Jackson and Tyreek Sapp and the like, I'd be very surprised if they did not get a quarter of their NFL draft tape in this one game. Like once DJU got hurt, it was curtains. Not that he was good to start with, but neither Brock Glenn nor Luke Kromenhoek are anywhere close to ready for games like this. Lawrence Toafili, Ja'Kai Douglas are guys that like I respect what they've done. They've been there for a couple of years, but that's just not enough to have a respectable offense. And that's why FSU's offense is 129th out of 133 FBS teams. So Florida should win this game by a lot of points, Chris. Florida should win this game by a lot of points. Percent chance to win. I mean, I guess the key is just don't beat yourself. That's it. That's it. I don't need to go into any more detail than that. FSU is not capable of beating Florida unless Florida beats Florida for FSU. Percent chance to win. You remember Wolf of Wall Street, the Grenada scene? Like this case is unlosable.
Yes.
Yeah, this is like maybe one or two rungs down the ladder from that. Florida would have to completely implode in a fashion unlike we have ever seen before to lose this game. Because again, the people that I talked to in Tallahassee who were plugged into the program say this team has quit. They have shut down the operation in Tallahassee. They don't want to be there. They just want the season to be over with and start on their offseason. And in a lot of cases, look to transfer, look for their next homes. There is no conceivable way Florida should lose this game. I'll say 98%.
Wow.
Not a guarantee, but it could happen, leaving 2% chance. But I would be stunned if even with Napier's shortcomings. I would be shocked if Florida loses this game. And if they do, if Florida loses this game, that's it. No more. I'm done with Napier forever. Like he'd have to win a national championship to get me back. So I'm just not seeing it. Again, there are too many people who've told me that FSU has just shut it down. Score prediction, I'll say, see, like I think FSU covers on the back door. I think Florida starts out with like a 28-3 lead at halftime, and then Napier just cruises from there, and Florida wins like 31-17 because the Gators are, I don't know, they're celebrating, they're doing the tomahawk chop at their fans, whatever. They just didn't want to get in the locker room and go to look for their next bowl opponent. So Florida wins 31-17, but it's a backdoor cover. Florida dominates the game and then takes their foot off the gas in the second half.
Interesting. Well, it's pretty darn close to Dustin's model. He has the Gators winning 34-17, a slight cover. I predicted 37-10. We will see this Saturday in Tallahassee. It would be the Gators' first victory over the Noles since the 2021 season. And if that is the case, it would be the first time since 2019 that the team that won the game won by double digits. So a lot to see on Saturday. We are
Man,
excited to recap it next week, and we'll be awaiting where Florida will be going bowling. It's exciting times here in Gainesville and here on the All Kinds Weather Forecast. So make sure, if you're not already, hit that subscribe button down below. Like this show, leave us a comment, your reaction of how your opinion of Billy Napier has changed throughout the season. And if you're listening on our audio platforms, please rate and review the show. Helps us bring Gator Nation great content. So, from all of us here at the All Kinds of Weather Forecast, we want to wish you all and your families a very happy Thanksgiving. Go Gators, and let's beat those Noles.